Okay. Our neighborhood meeting agenda. So what we'll want to talk about today we'll provide some organizer introductions. We'll discuss the project area descriptions and some frequently asked questions. We'll talk about what we've done to date, discuss the design alternatives selected, talk about some permits and what to expect next, how comments received are utilized. Again, we'll talk about some formal comment response that we have received already to date and additional project information. Our city contact information will also be provided at the end of this presentation. So allowing myself to introduce myself, I'm Josh King. I'm the City of Shoreline project manager for this project. Kendra, as you've met already, she's our traffic engineer, and she will be helping assist with some of the questions as well throughout this meeting. And Darren is our design consultant with Dow, who's helped us design and develop this project to where we're at today. Oh, and Darren got into the waiting room, so he should be in now. Let's see here. So we'll discuss the project area. So the project limits are from 145th to 155th Street Northeast along, or 155th Street along First Avenue Northeast. I'll go ahead and take a moment to note here that from 145th to 148th, a lot of this is under current development or future development. And so many and most of, well, the general area of that will be developed by developers within right of way here to come. See, moving through a little bit about the project. The project proposes to provide continuous pedestrian facilities along at least one side of the corridor, improving non-motorized connectivity along First Avenue while enhancing accessibility to the future Sound Transit Shoreline South 148th station. Project elements will include construction of curb, gutter, and sidewalk, construction of ADA curb ramps within the project limits, construction of driveways to tie into the existing driveways, and new storm drain systems as needed with the project. Additionally, we'll
Hey, Josh, I'm going to stop you for a second. We can't hear you. So we've confirmed from Darren too that we can't hear you. So if you could start over on this slide, that would probably be helpful. It might be your headset, would be my guess. Can't hear you still. And Janet, I realize you just joined. We are trying to resolve a technical difficulty at the moment, so bear with us. You let me know if you want me to take over. Okay, it sounds like Josh is totally frozen. I'm going to give him just a minute to see if we can get him back in. maybe if I kick him out. Although he is the host, so that might be a challenge. I don't know if I can advance slides without him. My apologies, everybody. We'll get this resolved here quickly. Okay, he's back. All right, Josh, give it a try. And perhaps turning off your video could help as a starting point. I don't know. We lost our presentation. Let's see. Oh, there we go. I got to ask him to unmute. Are you there, Josh?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. Hey, sorry about that, guys.
No big deal.
Are we able to see slides okay?
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. Starting back, sidewalk widths. Why does the city intend to provide a 10-foot width sidewalk along First Avenue? Larger sidewalks improve safety while increasing mobility for a variety of non-motorized forms of transportation, including bicyclists of all ages and abilities. The city's complete street ordinance, as well as the city's draft transportation element, a component of the comprehensive plan, requires accommodation of bicyclists on this street. 10-foot sidewalks provide enough separation for 2-directional usage, while 6-foot sidewalks and less, unfortunately, only provide enough room for a single directional use. With the increase in density of current and future development, future opening of the Sound Transit Light Rail Station, and the supporting 148th Street Non-Motorized Bridge and 145th Street offline bike networks, increased mobility for all users is essential with the future pedestrian and cycling volumes in this area. Tree preservation methods. How will the city incorporate methods to preserve trees along First Avenue? As we move forward with design, a licensed arborist will evaluate and determine the health and viability, along with any hazard to public safety that are present with respect to existing street trees. Our designers will consider and utilize all available tools and facility types, including but not limited to boulevard or raised walkways, 8-foot neck downs, and realignment to meander around viable trees. Heat islands. How will the city consider the impacts of heat islands with the First Avenue sidewalk project? The city has recently developed a climate tool to build climate resilience and awareness into city projects. As of a 2019 urban study of heat island index within the project limits range from 0 to approximately 2.6. A 2.6 index is found within the limits of 148th and 149th, and a secluded pocket with an index of 1.8 is generated close to the north end of the existing soccer fields. To promote cooling effects, conventional concrete pavements and/or permeable pavements, where feasible, will be used. It should also be noted that as this project moves forward, efforts will be taken to utilize the footprint of the existing hardscapes where feasible. Road widths. Is a 2-lane road going to be able to accommodate all the future development? A traffic impact analysis has been performed, and the addition of a right turn lane at North 155th is required in order to comply with the Shoreline Municipal Code traffic level of service standards. This part of the project will be funded by redevelopment projects in the area and will be built by the project. An additional left turn lane will be provided at 145th with the 145th corridor project. No widening is proposed beyond the addition of the right turn lane associated with this project. No additional traffic mitigation has been identified. However, the city will continue to review redevelopment projects impacts on a case-by-case basis. Funding. How is this project paid for? $2 million has been allocated to the project through the interlocal agreement with Sound Transit. Future funds will be provided for addition of the right turn lane improvements at North 155th Street. So what have we done to date? We've completed a review of the existing conditions, developed a conceptual and alternative noted as 1A with 10-foot wide sidewalks on the west side, and have reviewed some additional conceptual alternatives that were explored, of which have been omitted from the project scope at this time. So some design alternative for 1A. This section's a bit unique to be discussed in that essentially what we'll be proposing with this project moving forward is a lane balance, shifting lanes or maintaining the lane balance of 10 feet on each side and kind of shifting the section of proposed sidewalk to the east to allow for some additional room along the west. Moving through the alternative analysis and plan, we can see that we kind of start the process or the project at 145th along First Avenue up until 148th, where the project begins construction of Sidewalk in that north corner. Moving along, we can see how there will be driveway impacts that we will look for temporary easement from the adjacent property owners and provide driveway improvements where needed, where the sidewalk will be installed. Additionally, moving along the corridor, as we've talked about with the shift in the center line, we'll in this area here where we're at Thornton Creek, we'll also be able to provide a shift of that sidewalk to the east and provide a neck down of an 8-foot width to be able to accommodate the existing footprint of the existing pavement to mitigate and consider the impacts in that area or the buffer impacts and maintain the existing footprint. That same concept can kind of be considered throughout as we move to the north, where we have existing trees. We can look at having the sidewalk shift farther to the east in order to, well, essentially not have the same level of impact maybe shown in this plan, but we'll be doing the review and the design analysis of that as we move forward. Again, over here to the very north end where we're installing the new right turn lane, we can actually utilize some of this pavement that we have in the existing shoulder to shift that traffic to the east and reduce down some of that existing or that proposed pavement as well. So to talk on that a little bit more, you know, a lot of these times when we're developing plans, we look at an alternative analysis to let us know what the footprint is and what the limitations are of the project. And that's kind of where we're at in this process. So some of this may not essentially necessarily be shown right in this graphic, but it's stuff that we're looking at here at the city to consider, you know, the needs of the community and the environment as a whole. So anticipated permits. The State Environmental Policy Act, SEPA, requires that we provide a SEPA checklist and updated critical report. The Washington State Environmental Policy Act requires a lead public agency, Shoreline being one of them, to identify and analyze environmental impacts associated with government decisions. A SEPA checklist is a thorough document with a format prescribed by the Washington State Department of Ecology. Many of the items discussed in that document are indicated below relating to the natural environment and the built environment. So anticipated permits, SEPA review period, and how to comment. So for the schedule, the project SEPA checklist will be issued for public comment by the Department of Planning and Community Development. An update to where we were at when we produced this slide originally. This document will be uploaded and available when completed, and intake has been accepted by our planning department, which we're hoping to provide as soon as possible within the next couple of weeks. A link will be provided at that time on the project webpage at the time of posting with additional information regarding how to submit comments. And so what to expect next? From fall 22 to winter 2023, the city will coordinate with property owners for temporary construction easements on adjacent private property and initialize the final design. And currently our anticipated construction window is summer of 2023. And so how comments are utilized. Comments provide us with the help to the city to have a better understanding of public interest. I believe it promotes equity and inclusion, and it improves the process and procedures that we follow. So with that, we've had some formal comments come in that have been requested that we have provide. And so at this time, I'll take an opportunity to answer them. And then here in a little bit at the end of the slide, we'll have an opportunity to discuss additional comments as requested. So how many and which significant trees are being tagged for removal? How can the public access this information? So again, kind of as I was saying earlier, this is a very early stage in design. As the project moves forward, a licensed arborist will be selected to evaluate and determine the health and viability of trees. And at this time, no tree has been tagged, or and then every effort will be taken to preserve existing trees where feasible. Again, as discussed, alternative design measures within this project include, and are not limited to, necking sidewalks to 8 feet, raised platforms, or some meandering of the alignment around existing trees to the maximum extent feasible. So what is the tree vegetation replacement plan and which species? So with that, tree vegetation replacement plan will be developed as it's required. We're just not quite there yet, but we will be referring to the shoreline code 12.30.040 and 20.50.360 for that as needed. Vegetation maintenance plan, and particularly watering. Again, we're not quite there yet. Vegetation plan will be made available as it's required. So how will the river otters that are part of Lake Washington Thornton Creek waterways be protected in this plan? They must have access to the culvert across northeast to Twin Ponds. So this project does not propose any impact to the existing culvert along Thornton Creek. And again, kind of as I discussed earlier, though the alternative analysis may not explicitly show buffer mitigation plans at this time, measures will be taken to limit impacts to these existing stream buffer and by shifting the roadway center line to the east. So construction of that new sidewalk is intended to stay within the existing roadway prism. Currently, there's minimal parking at Twin Ponds Park. Many park along the west side of First Avenue Northeast where the sidewalk is planned. Will parking still be allowed here? So I'm going to let Kendra expand on this in a little bit here later, but this is an item of discussion. The city does plan to conduct a parking supply and utilization study, which will include both Twin Ponds parking lots, as well as the adjacent on-street parking. And at the time of that study, a formal response will be added to the project website for the public to be aware of. In order to accommodate sidewalks, will parking be reduced in the parking lots? Construction activity may limit parking. This is to be determined at this time, though, as we will know more clearly as the staging needs and what is needed for construction at the construction phase. If there is any impacts to the parking during construction, parking will return to its existing condition within the lot following construction. Is there a plan to increase parking? If so, will it involve tree removal? Please describe. So the First Avenue sidewalk project is not scoped to add additional parking. So if any additional parking measures are to be included, it will be supplemental to the original scope. Essentially, I can't give an answer to if it'll involve tree removals or not, because we're not scoped to do it. And I'll leave it at that. With the possibility of an added turn lane on North 155th, how much wider will the roadway be? We're seeing potentially not much. Widening will be minimal, provided the existing shoulders accommodate most of the width needed for the required additional lane. And so this is a request more than a question. Please consider narrow sidewalks 6 or 8 feet. This can make an important difference in the number of significant trees removed. As kind of talked about before, 10-foot walks provide enough separation for 2-directional usage. Unfortunately, 6-foot walks don't provide that capacity. However, a neck down of 8 feet and sidewalks will be utilized as appropriate along the 2-directional paths when a notable feature such as a street tree is present or environmental impacts of concern. So for some additional information, please continue to view the project website. As far as construction notifications, what to expect letter will be mailed approximately 2 to 3 months before construction start date, and reminder postcards will be mailed approximately 2 weeks before the construction start date. And we're at that point where we'll, here's my contact information. I would like to be available as much as I can for any comment or any questions following this meeting. So please don't hesitate. My email is there and my phone number as well. And
thanks,
that,
Josh.
Yeah.
So I was just going to jump in and start addressing comments if we're there. Is that, do you think that's where we're at now?
Oh, yes, we are.
Great. So we have one comment in the chat, and then I see one hand raised, so I'll get to that one next. So Karen asks, we are being solicited by many folks to join an assemblage to sell our homes to developers so they can build townhomes. Wouldn't they be responsible for building sidewalks in that case? And would it make more fiscal sense for the city of Shoreline to let them do that? So I can answer that, or you can, it's up to you.
Well, I know that a lot of the parcels to the south that are already under development, they already have planned to produce and construct that sidewalk. But I think as far as anything that hasn't been already gone through the preliminary stage, maybe you might have a little more insight than I do about that.
I might, I can try to jump in there. So to answer your question, yes, we do require frontage improvements as part of redevelopment activity. And so any frontage improvements along First that, depending on timing, we would either ask the developer to build the plan that we have designed, or we would ask them to pay a fee in lieu in some cases. And so we have set up a structure through our municipal code where if the timing aligns and we have an existing capital project, we can ask them to contribute to our capital project that's about to hit the streets. And so that actually is going to probably be a little bit important in this case, because as probably everybody is aware, costs have gone pretty crazy over the last several years. And that's across the board in construction as well. So the money that Sound Transit had slated for these access improvements to the city, oh geez, it's been many years now. I was a part of that process, but costs have escalated beyond what we had ever sort of envisioned at that point. So we're really going to be doing some value engineering on this project. And part of that is kind of keeping fingers crossed that some of the redevelopment projects will contribute toward the project, either in building the frontage directly or in that fee in lieu sense. So hopefully that answers your question, Karen. I'd be happy to follow up if there's more detail you're seeking. With that, oh, Karen's got a question. Janet, let me get to Karen's follow-up question and I'll get right to you, just because it's in the same vein I'm thinking as her chat questions. I'm going to unmute you, Karen. Go ahead whenever you're ready. Nope, that didn't work, did it? Ask to, there we go.
Hi, it's Karen. Can you hear me?
I can, thank you.
I was going to say, go ahead and take other questions and come back to me, because you may answer my questions by answering other people's, and I've already taken time, so
Sure thing.
I'll wait.
Okay, great. All right. Janet, I have asked you to unmute, so you are set, I think. And if you're not, there we go.
Hello.
Hi, Janet.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I am going to suggest a alternate idea. I am very familiar with this site, as some of you may know from history with Thornton Creek and stuff that went on when Aegis was built. And so I am wondering, why can't we consider building the sidewalk on the opposite side of the street, where there already is a sidewalk for Aegis? And then, you know, the section that goes between Aegis and 155th is just, you know, a blank slate. And while there is a channel there in a wetland, you could build a pervious sidewalk, 10 feet wide if you want, and it probably wouldn't harm anything. It would probably improve it, because you could probably do some, you know, vegetation management there of the invasive plants. And it would probably improve a lot of things. And that would mean you wouldn't have to cut any trees on the other side. And I realize that, you know, this is not your current plan, but I'd like it to be considered, because, you know, it seems reasonable to me. And, you know, and if it impacts Aegis a little bit, well, fine. They can accommodate a little wider sidewalk. You could widen the sidewalk slightly inward toward the east, in their case, where their project is, and then you could build a wide sidewalk going up past that church. No one would mind that. Several churches there. No one would mind a wide sidewalk there, and you wouldn't impact hardly any trees that way. So I'd like you to consider that option seriously. And then that's my first question. And then my second comment is because if you build it on the other side, when you get to the section where the creek is, you're going to have to do a lot of careful work there. Thornton Creek has borne the brunt of development for the last 100 years. They built the damn freeway right in the middle of the creek, for one thing. And then it's taken a lot of hits everywhere. And so and not to mention what happened with Aegis and the destruction of the pond that was there, Peverly Pond. They destroyed it. It's gone. So I prefer that you didn't impact Thornton Creek. But if you do build it on the other side and on the west side, you're going to have to do some serious work there by the creek. Not to mention that all along the ball field, it's a wetland, and virtually that entire site is in the buffer of the critical area of the creek. So you're going to have to really consider it's not just about a sidewalk. You've got wetland, you've got creek buffer, got 100-foot buffer on either side of that creek, and so you've got a lot to consider there. So
Absolutely.
That's why I thought it would be simpler if you just built it on the other side of the street.
Thanks for that. Yeah, thanks for that feedback, Janet. That's all very, very good stuff. Josh, do you want to tackle the first question about why we chose the west side as opposed to the east side so far, and what information we might be able to provide in terms of why we chose that in terms of cost and sort of the overall length of need?
Yeah. I don't want to. Sure, I think that's a valid question, and I want to recognize the appreciation for it. When it comes to construction and constructability, when you talk about building a new sidewalk, removal and replacement is always a factor, and that's always an increase in the cost and the ability to perform that activity. It does also increase the ways of which they need to mitigate for removal of those those additional materials and replacement of new ones. So there's actually a little bit more challenge there as far as an environmental impact. Whereas if we're building on the west where there is currently no sidewalk and utilizing the existing footprint of the existing roadway and pavement, we're actually we're kind of simplifying our construction, and we're maintaining what's kind of already out there today. So yes, there is a recognized impact as far as being that close to the creek, but we're going to have that same hurdle to jump through, so to speak, as we construct the sidewalk, and if we were to build it on the east side as well. So as far as why we chose to build it on the west, I mean, there's the fact that we have no sidewalk there now to work with, and it helps improve traffic flow for pedestrians as well at the same time. So
yeah, great answer. So I was going to also say, Janet, so we know about several projects that are going to be constructing sidewalks, and part of what we're doing is we're trying to be opportunistic in how we use the funding that we've received from Sound Transit. We don't have a lot of funding. We need to stretch that as far as possible along First Avenue to provide the most benefit. But I think even beyond that, what we are trying to do, and I'll admit I'm sort of a secret amateur ecologist, so I'm on your side entirely. It's one of my main personal values, I would say, is kind of recognizing and trying to preserve, our very precious environment. But part of what the project's priority and goals are to certainly minimize impacts to the creek. And as Josh described, part of what we're trying to do in recognizing that is shift things a little bit around within the roadway prism in order to make sure that we're adding as little impervious surface as possible. And I think Josh talked about this during the presentation a little bit, but what you've seen to date in the diagrams, the roll plot online, is a little bit different than even what concept we've kind of settled on to date, which is really minimizing the expansion of the roadway prism to the maximum extent we can. And I think I'm hoping that folks will be at least, fairly happy with the outcome of, I am personally not expecting to see a ton of tree impacts. And I do value those high value mature trees on the north end of the street here. I am personally attached to as well. I take your concerns very much to heart, and we're going to do everything we can, as Josh mentioned, within feasibility, right, to meander, to use other treatments, and to neck down in order to avoid those very valuable trees. So I appreciate all of those comments. The other thing I was going to say is maybe we have the ability to put together a diagram to kind of show the differential between the two sides in terms of that impact to kind of rebuilding versus filling in gaps. That might be another thing to highlight. I'll see what we might be able to do there. Okay, I want to make sure we get to everybody. There are a lot of people writing in now, so that's great. I'm going to take a chat and then I'll get back to you, Karen. So as a former, and this comes from Melody, as a former bike commuter, I'm really questioning about mixing bicyclists of all age with pedestrians. The thought of young kids hot dogging down the sidewalk with older folks and people with strollers, etc., is trouble in the making. So Josh, I can tackle this one unless you'd prefer.
Oh no, go ahead. I have some of my own personal insights on trails, but you go ahead.
Sure. I think everybody has their personal insights on trails. I mean, this is something that everybody experiences as they walk along trails, is having sort of some maybe close calls or discomfort along those trails. So what in recognizing all of the constraints in terms of funding, in terms of environmental impacts, part of what we're trying to do too is really minimize, again, the prism, the pavement prism. We don't want to expand that pavement cross section too much. And part of how we can keep that small is by providing a shared use path, because that shared use path provides separation for, let's say, a 5-year-old that's riding their bike with their parents while they jog, while an on-street bike lane certainly does not provide that, right? And so the intent here, and this is a pretty common regional standard, is to provide a facility that all folks will feel comfortable riding a bike on. And that is a pretty important priority and feature of most regional plans these days as it relates to transportation. Totally understand that is not a comfortable concept for everybody. But I do want to note that a lot of folks that are the more avid riders, they'll probably continue using the roadway lanes for quite a while rather than bomb down the sidewalk, which is, both more of a risk to them as a high-speed bicyclist, but, also recognizing they don't want to have friction with pedestrians either. What I also want to note is that, while this tends to be a popular focus in recent days of talking about how we need everybody separate, the reality is that most collisions, and I would say, in our city, in terms of what I'm aware of, and I do review all collisions in our city annually, we have a large, amount regionally, and we're right there with the region of pedestrian versus car and bicyclist versus car collisions. And that's kind of what we're trying, that's our priority. We have to focus on priorities. We can't do it all. We can't balance environmental impacts. We can't balance tree impacts and also provide bicycle facilities that separate everybody out between their mode. And so what we have to do is prioritize based on a number of factors. But what I do know is that those bike versus car collisions where a bicyclist gets hurt is far and above anything we experience in terms of any pedestrian and bicyclist conflict. That's not to say that pedestrian and bicyclist conflicts don't happen, but they are far less likely to result in a serious injury than a bicyclist versus car collision. And so those are the sorts of hierarchies we have to think through in terms of, we've got limited budget, limited ability to impact, trees, environment, trying to keep things small and context sensitive. And so we have to make those difficult choices. And certainly if we had, if everything was perfect, we would like to see separated facilities. that were also protected for bicyclists, but unfortunately there's just not enough width to work with here. So hopefully that kind of answers your question. So I was going to go back to Karen now. I'm going to ask you to unmute, Karen.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for this, by the way. I really appreciate it. We are on First Avenue Northeast, so we are directly impacted. This is going to be right in front of our house, and not that everybody isn't directly impacted, they are, but what I'm trying to get at is we've been dealing with construction of all the new townhomes further down the road, and they've started constructing some right next to us, to the point where all of us who were hoping that we could keep our single family houses are now like without hope, and we're assembling and we're probably going to sell. So I just want to put out there again that it seems awkward to do this work more than once if we don't need to. So it's just something to think about. Then the other thing is, when they were putting up the new set of townhomes that went to us, there was all this theater about saving the trees and putting ribbons on the trees. And then once they tore down the homes, then they just came through and clear cut. And I asked about that, and the response was they just paid a fine to do that. So I appreciate, that we're talking about it, but does the City of Shoreline have a different ethical response than, say, for instance, a developer who's just trying to get the most housing that they can get? Because we lost so many trees. It was like one of the saddest things I've ever seen in my life. And then further than I would go further than and also say, what is the ultimate goal of the City of Shoreline? We moved to Shoreline because of all the single family houses and the neighborhoods you could have, and the schools and the parks like Twin Ponds. And it feels like they want to become Seattle North, and they used to be, right, North Seattle. So I'm not being naive, but is the goal to have a lot more of this kind of construction? And I ask that as somebody who wants to make a decision about whether I still want to live in Shoreline because I have to sell.
Yeah. I appreciate that. So Karen, I will try to address actually your latter question first. It's a kind of an overarching and larger concept, right, to address. So I will, Josh, if that's okay, I'll try to address Karen's question first, and then potentially if you want to talk about tree retention and kind of policies around that, you can. I'll fill in kind of my knowledge and understanding a little bit if I can too. But to get to your question, are we trying to just be Seattle, or kind of trying to see more of that style of construction? So I want to introduce a concept, and just bear with me here. I like getting into philosophy a little bit, but the Growth Management Act really compels cities to find strategic and smart ways to accommodate the growth that we know is coming. Okay, so I'll start with that. We know as a region, we know as a state, we are growing in general in terms of people kind of migrating to this region, and we have been for quite some time. And so we are kind of tasked as a city with the responsibility of figuring out how do we accommodate that growth in a smart way. And so there, before sort of some of the guardrails around growth happened in our region, what you saw was called urban sprawl. So you see, lots of subdivisions out kind of in what used to be rural areas, and they inherently end up destroying forest land and requiring very long commutes. So if you're familiar with that urban sprawl environment, that's sort of what happened when we weren't doing smart growth planning around things like transportation infrastructure. So you get less expensive housing on the fringes, which requires longer trips in to destination points, and also is more detrimental to our natural environment as a whole when we're looking at the region. And so with the Growth Management Act, what we're trying to do in response to that, and in being a environmentally sustainable city, is we're trying to plan where that density occurs so that it can occur in a way that is less reliant on cars, that utilizes less space and clear cuts less trees. But that's not to say that there's never going to be an impact. There absolutely will be. More people and housing more people and employing more people certainly does have an impact on our natural environment. There's no doubt about that. But what we are trying to do is trying to create sort of the infrastructure that supports that land use in a way that is least impactful and that our city can best kind of absorb, if that makes sense. Because otherwise what would happen is you would see this kind of scattered growth around our city, which would be definitely car reliant, that would not have, the ability to concentrate pedestrian and bicyclists infrastructure to support trips on foot or bike or just basically non-car, good access to our brand new light rail station to allow people to access jobs and other destinations without having to take a car, right? So those are all some of the principles around why we are focusing in on this particular area and why the density is happening here. So hopefully that sort of sets the stage for why you see some of what you're seeing in your neighborhood. So to your other question about kind of what happened on site, that's sad for me too. Absolutely, like that tears my heart out. I hate to see trees come down. And I don't know the entire history behind what happens on site or how those fees are assessed. That's a comment and something I'm hearing resonating that we can share with management team. And I certainly am an advocate for that in that realm of saving trees. So you can count me on your side there. But in terms of what the city's principles are, certainly we follow code and certainly we follow sort of, the requirements that are set for our own, tree retention policies. I do understand that there have been contractor errors, particularly on 5th Avenue Northeast as part of that sidewalk construction. So that's something that hopefully we've learned a lesson on and we can prevent in the future. But in general, our project, the way that we have set this project up, it really is being designed in a way to maximize the tree retention. So I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Josh, if you had more specific details about tree retention policies or code.
Well, I to your first response, I think in my review of kind of some of the comments that came in from others, I've stumbled upon a report that was produced by UW and the City of Shoreline around shared use paths and kind of in line with what you were talking about is that like mobilization or ability to like commute effectively. And so perhaps maybe you and I can talk about that, and maybe that's something we can provide because it's available online. I'd be happy to share it through the project webpage if it's helpful for others to review. But as far as with trees, I agree. It's a hard one for me as well. Again, another thing I wanted to point out is I'm fairly new to the City of Shoreline, so I'm really thankful that Kendra was able to attend today. Some of these questions are really good, and I'm glad that she's been able to help provide this response in a way that it's kind of moving, if you will. One thing I'll note, and again, being new to the City of Shoreline, is where do those fees go? That's something I would ask is what are these fees that are being paid in lieu of keeping these trees, and how can they benefit the city? And so I personally don't have that answer today, but I'm going to ask it following this meeting because I'm curious.
I think we have some good work to do on trees still as a city, especially as we're entering this sort of fast-paced growth environment. This is something that I care deeply about and I hope to get more involved in. And Melody, to your point on they just sell the lumber for the amount that they're fined, that is an excellent point that I will certainly convey to others. I don't know what the fee was or how that ultimately pans out, but that's a fair point. Trees are valuable, not just standing. And so I hope that the penalty that folks are facing is not simply an offset of what they can gain. That's not hopefully the intention there. So appreciate that comment. I had a comment in the chats here that says, Has there been any review of street lighting along this section of First Avenue? Street lighting is really important for pedestrian and bike safety. Appreciate this comment. So this gets back to our budget constraint point. And so we, the project itself is you can think of it as a sort of grant from Sound Transit, and it's a modest one given our construction environment right now. It really does not include the provision for installing new street or pedestrian lighting. One thing I'll note is that new development code that we've put in does require some pedestrian scale lighting be installed as part of if certain conditions are met. So I would expect to see, when we see that multifamily, multi-story redevelopment occurring, that they'll be installing lights as part of their projects or providing enough light from their awnings and the like to light the sidewalk. We have not performed a comprehensive streetlight analysis. This is something that we definitely need to focus on a little bit more. Hopefully, one of my goals as we kind of advance the design is potentially slating some future connections for streetlights would be a good practice here as we build the sidewalk, certainly, but we don't have funding to do that right now. If there are particular utility poles that are not currently housed with streetlights from Seattle City Light, you can let me know, particularly if they're at intersections. That's something that we like to focus on, and we can move that through our process, which is sometimes long in terms of getting additional streetlights there. I do also want to note, though, since we've been talking about environment and sustainability, I'm also sensitive to dark sky initiatives, meaning, at night, it's kind of supposed to be dark for animals a little bit. And so we want to minimize the impacts to the natural environment, especially around the park. And the wetland area there. And so please know that that is another thing that I take into strong consideration in terms of balancing where we're installing streetlights versus not. All of our standards, I should note, are considered dark sky compliant in that they don't allow uplighting and they do kind of cast a specific cone of light, but that's still something we need to be sensitive to. So I just wanted to note that. Great question though. But please do contact me directly if you have a specific spot you'd like to see better lit. Okay, a question from, let's see. Has COVID slowed the expected growth in the Pacific Northwest, or is it too soon to know with people working from home now? I appreciate your thoughtful responses. Thank you. I don't know if Josh can answer this. I don't have an answer for you. I haven't seen a lot of great projections so far. So I'll tell you, I'm obviously in the transportation industry. I've been to plenty of committee meetings and the like, and everybody is really perplexed about what we're going to see in the future. There is definitely a recognition, and I think the Shoreline resident survey comes, it will come out, the results of that will come out soon. We do that on a cyclical basis. We, in that survey, I think this time asked the question kind of, did your work conditions change? Are you working remotely now? And what's the future trajectory of that? And we are seeing responses indicating that, yeah, a lot of people will be working either fully remote or hybrid. That said, our traffic volumes have returned to practically pre-COVID conditions at this point. And the redevelopment activity has just gone through the roof, as many of you may see on your daily walks and drives throughout the city. So, on the one hand, I want to say, yeah, maybe some of the trips due to COVID have changed, and maybe people are relocating based on their ability to work from home entirely. I don't know. I just don't know the answer to that question, and nobody in my industry seems to know either. I think there's a lot of movement going on, and that's about as good as I can get in terms of a guess. And Josh, I don't know if you have anything to add either.
I mean, I was just gonna say, aside from me and my wife trying to find our home after we moved here, I think that was probably the biggest indication that there's definitely growth in the Northwest. I do fairly keep some out there review of articles, and I've seen that the Seattle area as a whole, and Shoreline included, is growing. But I don't know. Those are always just the kind of articles people write. So That's basically the best I can do to answer that.
Yeah, I think it's a real big unknown, and it's a wait and see for sure. And Melody, I see your follow-up question about the sequestration of carbon. I totally agree with you. And the fact that trees provide a place people want to be. That is absolutely critical. I couldn't agree with you more. That's one major reason why we've tried to keep everything kind of constrained to the degree we can within the existing kind of paved and gravel surface. But I agree that needs to be a goal of ours, both from a developer and city right-of-way perspective. I think, like I said, I think there's still some work to be done, certainly on the private site side, which does get very complicated and challenging very quickly in terms of, rights of property owners versus rights of the public. And that is certainly not my area of expertise, but in terms of the right-of-way, just know that you have a friend in me. This is something that I care deeply about. Let's see, I don't see any additional questions. Janet, if you still have your hand up with an additional question, I'm going to unmute you now if you'd like. And then we'll try to wrap up here pretty soon. I think we're supposed to wrap up by 8. Is that correct, Josh? Or do we have till 8:30?
Originally 8, yes.
Okay, great. I'm going to unmute you, Janet. Go ahead whenever you're ready. Maybe Janet, that might have been a remaining hand up from the first time. So, okay. Oh, okay. I see Janet's question in the chat now. Staff answers to be very kind and accommodating, but not really accommodating alternative views or concepts that should be addressed on impacts to the environment. I loved Karen's question about where are we supposed to move. I didn't see that. I apologize. And what is the city's plan? I feel that the answers were unsatisfying. Okay, thanks for that feedback, Janet. So in terms of alternate views or concepts, yeah, I mean, I think we will be considering alternate designs. We're just kind of barely at the 60% mark, and I think maybe barely at that, given that we have kind of some refinements to make. I think that there will be quite a few refinements even from what we've planned so far in terms of the 10-foot path on the west side. I can see us certainly doing some neck downs, some meandering, and other refinements, including narrowing up the roadway surface as well, in order to repurpose that space for the new sidewalk facility. So I think there's a lot to do there still. We will certainly look into and try to provide some information about choice of side. I do understand what you're saying. We did kind of as a staff team look at that early on, and even quite recently, to be honest. But we didn't kind of formally provide a document that summarizes those choices. So I think that we can potentially respond to that better. So we'll work on that. I appreciate that. And in terms of in terms of where are we supposed to move and what is the city's plan, I think, Janet, you're certainly aware of the comprehensive plan. I think that is probably the best outline of the city's vision, and I should have shared that earlier. My apologies. So for Karen, if you search Shoreline Comprehensive Plan and potentially maybe Darren or Josh could pull up the webpage and paste that in the chat. That is really where the city lays out its vision for the next 20-year time frame, and it includes transportation, but it also includes a number of other kind of factors like land use and a whole host of other things, sustainability, et cetera. And so it really lays out what the vision is, what we think we're going to see in these areas over the future, over the kind of near-term future, and lays out a strategy, several goals, and sort of implementation steps to get there. And so I think that talks a lot about what the city's plan is. We are in the middle of our transportation master plan update, which will kind of tweak how we looked at it. Let's say, well, it's been more than 10 years now since we adopted that. So how have we changed and adapted since then, and what are our new strategies and goals? And the comprehensive plan will be updated, I think within the next several years as well. I can't remember the time frame for that, but it will probably say so on the webpage. And I do want to note too that there are resident and business and you know, just stakeholder opportunities once a year to amend the comprehensive plan, which is really the groundwork for kind of the various codes and policies that exist in our city. And so the city does invite folks to participate in that process every year. Hopefully that makes sense. And in terms of where you're supposed to move, that's a good question that I certainly cannot answer. Okay. Yeah, I feel you. I definitely understand that pain. Like I said, I'm a secret ecologist kind of as a hobby. And I think what I keep in mind personally, and this does not necessarily quell anybody's feelings, and it's not intended to, I just want you to know that I hear you. But what I think of when I see the density and redevelopment happening near the light rail stations is that has preserved a very valuable forest that is probably much larger in scale and impact that would have occurred if that urban sprawl land use continued the way that it was on the trajectory to. So while I'm seeing it here near and close to my house, I live in Shoreline too. What I try to think about is the overall regional impact, I think is much better when it's concentrated near our transit facilities and in a place where that land use can be concentrated and densified to destroy less of our natural environments. That's what I try to keep in mind, but I do understand that that is hard. Okay. I am on mute. Karen saying, I'd be happy to give you a neighborhood tour and talk to you about how First Avenue is currently used. I appreciated your answer on the future of Shoreline and why the choices are being made. It makes sense. We are going to make a large sum of money because of these changes, but I would have preferred staying here long term. It's been a beautiful 20 years. Yeah, I appreciate that, Karen. And I'd love to connect with you. Absolutely. I will put my email in the chat and you can feel free to reach out to me and or Josh. And Josh, I don't want to steal the show here. You are absolutely welcome to chime in anytime. All right. Oh, never mind. Josh is experiencing microphone difficulties, so I will not ask him to chime in. It looks like we are getting close to the end of the questions. I'll allow a little space for other folks to join in, but I really appreciate everybody participating, and I especially appreciate your advocacy for our environment. I think it's extremely important, so keep doing what you're doing. And I'll tell you on the staff side, you're making a difference. So that's great. I see it behind the scenes, so you should be proud of that. All right. I think with that, I think we're ready to wrap up at this point, unless there are any remaining lingering questions or comments. I am not seeing any. So I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting. Again, if you have any lingering questions, please do feel free to reach out to Josh or I, and we will do our best to respond. Please also stay tuned to the project website, and we'll send updates to that website as they are available. Thank you so much for attending.